Yes, normally.
Achso, David, erstmal wollen wir dich vorstellen. Also wir sind sehr glücklich, dass David bei uns ausgestellt hat. Sehr schöne Plastiken hier mit den Körpern. Und ich glaube, Florian wird sie interviewen, wie das macht, weil das ist sehr faszinierend, auch mit den Schattenspielen.
Yeah, David, we're very happy to have you here, and we have a lot of people very interested in your work. And maybe you can introduce a little bit your technique, your ideas, to talk a little bit about your work to us. We would be very happy.
Okay, well, the main thrust of my work is very simple figurative imagery, but in fact what I do is I work with what I call my contemporary archetypal image of masculinity and femininity in a culture which actually is very interested in how we look. This seems to be very important in present culture. Images of masculinity stereotyped and femininity stereotyped, and really my work is an interpretation of that. It's how we see ourselves at the current time. But really the imagery is a vehicle. What I'm doing sculpturally speaking is taking a very cold, hard, mundane, industrial material, steel mesh which comes on a roll, and I'm, like all sculpture and painting and drawing, I'm actually creating a transformation from a material or a medium into another language, which is the visual language. I'm very fluent with my own visual language because it's an art form which is quite unique, one which I developed myself from ideas that I was working with as a student, using lots of photography and light projection and screen. I developed from using traditional materials, clay, wax, bronze, stone, into a transparent material because for me I was looking for the sort of magic and the subtleties in sculpture that you often find in drawing and painting. There's a sort of magic in the way that a line can be very evocative. And if you think about the material that I use, it has no real substance. It is in fact thousands of lines drawn in 3 dimensions, and that's really the way that I work. I'm literally drawing in space. And sometimes it feels that I'm actually bending space itself because the material hardly exists. It really has no substance. And yet, somehow, it has more presence than a solid object. It has a visual and optical quality which is peculiar to the medium and one which I simply exploit.
And also, David, let us talk a little bit about the shadow, because you remember yesterday the Enzo Santese, the art critic from Italy, was talking about how beautifully this projection on the wall of your sculptures, it has like a magic in itself.
I'm glad you mentioned the shadow because it's very important. It's a very important part because the work itself is all about light, and in any given situation, in any exhibition or when a sculpture is installed somewhere, it's more or less a live event because it's about light. It's how light works with the medium. It's a phenomenon to the material itself that it can produce a 2-dimensional version of itself with a very simple strategic light. I keep it very simple because the medium itself really does enjoy simplicity. It doesn't like you to be too clever with it. It doesn't like to have too much structure around it. It simply exists almost in its own universe. And everything that is in the 3-dimensional sculpture itself can be seen in an exaggerated form in the shadow. In fact, these pieces here, which are flat, are a direct response to the shadow itself. The first series of flat pieces that I did, and the flat ones, I tried to capture the essence of the character of the three-dimensional version from which it came. For instance, a piece like this would produce that image. It's blown up, it's redrawn on screen and then produced, bringing it back into, still in 3 dimensions, but in a flat form, and more recently in a curved form. And I called these my shadow series, the first ones, because they were a sort of attempt to say something about the shadow. Not to capture the shadow. It's something that is between 3D and 2D. That's where these exist. There's a space. I recognise that there was a space between the sculpture itself and the shadow that could actually be, I suppose, you might say, captured. And these are incredibly sophisticated as a completely new art form which is developed out of this. And of course they produce a shadow as well. And what I like to do with the sculpture and its shadow is literally compose. I create compositions between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions.
And can you speak also about the technique which you use to make this, because it's I think it's also a special material you use for it.
Yeah, I'm simply exploiting the quality. I understand the medium very well by now because I've been working for so many years, and I've literally developed my visual language. All of the lines and the marks I either done in a very, very subtle way, which shows up in the shadow, or in quite a strong way, deep modelling into the material, is literally controlling light through the medium. So the drawing that you actually see, the actual drawing rather than the modelling that you see in the sculpture, is of light and dark, is very much like drawing. It's a heavy pencil or a light pencil. The material itself is woven, so I can make it move from flat into 3D. Once I've actually got a 3-dimensional form and the character that I'm looking for, or the character that I've developed in the piece, is then fixed, very much like a charcoal drawing is then fixed. This is actually fixed with a hot metal, so every single joint is literally welded together. So they're much stronger than they actually look. And this welding process, the fixing process itself, enables me to achieve what would actually be impossible. I achieve a rigid, pure structure, which is what these are. They're a pure structure. Every joint is fixed, and it has a continuity of strength throughout. It's also rust-proof, of course, once you've coated it. It's an invisible fixing. You really need a microscope to see that every joint is locked. It's done by hand, it's modelled. I don't use moulds at all. Any sort of process that is a mechanical process, you will always lose something in that. And part of the vitality that you see, the sort of vitality that you find in a drawing, pencil, is always there in the medium. You don't lose it. If you use a mould, you lose that direct energy, which I think is probably the thing that gives them their fascinating life and vitality.
Thank you very much, David.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.